pass this over to George. George is going to introduce his wonderful panelists, and we're going to take this webinar off. So George, please take us away.
Chris, thank you. Thank you so much for the introduction and that background. I think while Washington and Berlin and Switzerland sound fun, I may be more inclined to join the one in Vegas. That sounds like might be like a little bit more of a good time. But all jokes aside, welcome to everybody, and thank you very much for joining this webinar. I would like to give a special thank you to Chris, Kai, and everybody at the INCBA for help actually organizing this webinar, so we can present our webinar on the legal situation of cannabis in Poland. As Chris briefly mentioned, my name is George Chaveras, and I am a partner at a law firm in Warsaw called B2R Law. Now, B2R Law, we're one of the largest independent Polish law firms of approximately 80 lawyers and offices in Warsaw, Krakow, and Katowice. A little bit about myself. The name and the accent may have you inclined to think that I'm not Polish, and you would be very correct. I may be well suited to moderate this webinar, given its international aspect of the group. By way of background, myself, I'm Canadian Greek, English law qualified, living in Poland, advising on cross-border matters generally across the whole globe. So basically, prior to moving to Poland, I worked for numerous years for a law firm called Linklaters in London, Moscow, and Warsaw, and it was in their banking and corporate practice. So you may think before you leave this discussion, what is a Canadian Greek English qualified person living in Poland going to be talking about cannabis in Poland? So now let me lead on to the next introduction, who's going to be a speaker, is my colleague, very well trusted partner and co-head of our cannabis practice at B2R Law, Malwina Niczke-Chmura. And together we advise domestic and international clients that are essentially manufacturers and distributors of cannabis products on the Polish market. And Malwina will be the one discussing for the majority of the time about the history, barriers, challenges, and legislative developments in the cannabis industry in Poland. Now, I initially was going to be giving a presentation on kind of the legal, not just the legal market, but kind of the industry, the way it's heading. But we were fortunate enough to get Dr. Albert Jesnak here, who is a pain medicine doctor specializing in medical marijuana therapy. We weren't sure if he'd be able to take time off from his practice to do this. So we thank you very much to Dr. Jesnak for being able to join us. He is working at the Institute of Pain Diagnostics and Treatment in Warsaw, as well as doing work in oncology and cardiology hospital in Otwock. He specializes in, like I mentioned, medical marijuana therapy for pain and cancer, and I'm sure many more things that I cannot pronounce that I'm sure he'll be able to much more eloquently than I can. So without further ado, Dr. Jesnak, I hand over to you.
Okay, hello. Give me 1 minute, okay, maybe less. Okay, I want to play my presentation. Okay. Okay. Yeah, is everything okay?
Excellent, we see it perfectly.
Okay, so in fact, I'm one of the youngest doctor in my clinic, but maybe it's a reason that I deal with cannabis medicine. In fact, cannabis, medical cannabis is very expensive in Poland. So I usually use rather traditional drugs like pregabalin, SNRI, or opioids, and of course, I mixed them with cannabis, medical cannabis. What's first? First, I want to say something about endocannabinoid system. I know that it's boring, but only a few points. First, it's very old system of receptors, and we really need it. We have cannabis receptors in our whole body, and we know that we cannot live without this system, without endocannabinoid system. Some people have a special mutation, and for example, they have too much anandamide, our natural endocannabinoids, and they don't feel pain. In fact, it's horrible because they're hurting all the time. Even when they want to prepare something simple in the kitchen. It's a really big problem to don't feel the pain. And also, we know that endocannabinoid system is a part of appetite and metabolism stimulants. So we tried to stop this receptor CB1, CB2 in obesity treatment, and when you stop these receptors, patients will feel very unpleasant. Even some people can have depressed or even make suicide when you completely turn off this system. So cognitive function, neuroplasticity, of course, appetite and metabolism, thermoregulation, very important, especially in cancer treatment, in oncology. Sleep-wake cycle, immunomodulation, very modern word, but it's a fact. Some other hormone axis that's also very important in medicine. Here, what we have here? Here we have some information about CBD. And what we should know about CBD? We should know that it's extremely difficult for doctors to use CBD because it's work in very a lot of ways. Of course, in the CBD, some serotonin receptors that we don't is also a lot of interaction with drugs between CBD, especially between CBD. What is hemp? So generally, how we could classify it? Generally, we have one genus, Cannabis sativa. Cannabis sativa, nominative, indica, and ruderalis. And we should use these names because the other it's a traditional names like marijuana or hemp. In fact, in medicine, we don't use sativa or indica. Almost all strains of cannabis are hybrid. Yeah. Sorry. Do you want to say something? Okay.
No, I pushed that by accident. My apologies.
Okay. So almost all strains are hybrid. In fact, we use sativa or indica when, for example, we have genotype that have 70% of sativa and the rest of indica. And we use the word hybrid when it's 1-to-1. Of course, we have also chemotype that it's in fact more important, and phenotype it's only for biologists. We also have ruderalis. Generally, we don't use it in medicine, but there are some new interesting hybrids between ruderalis and sativa and ruderalis and indica that, for example, can be planted in a cold climate of Colorado mountains, for example. Nothing that we use in medicine. So what is typical for medical marijuana? Especially that it's a rough medical material, standardized to THC and CBD. Usually it's young leaves and flowers of Cannabis sativa. It should be prepared in pharmaceutical quality, and it should be good quality material. In fact, it's also more complicated. Generally, it's a very, very big problem for cannabis company to have a good quality material standardized to plus minus 10% of THC and CBD. For example, in Germany, it's plus minus 20%. And there was a few situations when some strains of cannabis don't fit in this Polish norm, and they sell it in Germany. It was a very big problem for my patients because they use it every day, for example, in fibromyalgia, and they didn't have the drug that helped him for example, 2-3 months. What was the most important? This tight norm, plus minus 10%. It's really difficult to have raw material, plant material in this tight norm. Okay, but cannabis, it's not only THC and CBD. We have to remember that there are a lot of others cannabinoids. It's mean that this part of medicine it's more difficult because of drug interaction, of course. What's the most important? I think that CBG and CBN, both of them are very interesting, but there is no any product in Poland standardized to CBG or CBN. In fact, I don't know any product in the world that is standardized to CBG or CBN. All products that I know are standardized to THC and CBD. But CBG don't have any narcotic. CBG is not narcotic and have definitely more anti-inflammatory potential than CBD or THC. And what is interesting about CBN? It is interesting from a legal perspective, because CBN it's partial CB receptors agonist. So THC it's also CB receptors agonist. CBD it's negative agonist, so it's not narcotic. In fact, CBN it's also narcotic. It's also could be narcotic, especially in higher doses. But in the Polish law, it's not treated like narcotic. It's the same like CBG or CBD. So I think it could be interesting for lawyers. Okay, so what's more? Of course, in cannabis, we also have a lot of terpenes. It's not the most important things for this presentation, but you should know it. Okay. Wait a moment. Okay.
And for everybody that's interested in the scientific underpinnings, we will make this available to all of our attendees. So anything that you see that's interesting that you missed, we'll have people will have this.
Yeah, of course, it's not a problem. Okay, so what's about therapeutic areas? So, of course, we have multiple sclerosis. We have also in Poland the cannabis-based medicine, cannabis-based drug, Sativex. Probably you know it. and it's officially registered in multiple sclerosis. But it's registered for spasm, like a spasmolytic in multiple sclerosis. In fact, a lot of patients with multiple sclerosis have also neuropathic pain, and it also can help with this kind of pain. The next one, oncological disease, of course, synergism with CBD, and generally it's the best idea to start treatment from THC to CBD 1-to-1 ratio strain. In oncological disease, I could compare medical cannabis to a second floor of analgesic leader, like dihydrocodeine or tramadol. Definitely, medical cannabis is weaker than opioids. It's definitely weaker than morphine, fentanyl, oxycodone. But we can mix them. We can mix medical cannabis with morphine. There is synergy. We can mix it with fentanyl. We should not mix it with oxycodone and buprenorphine because of drug interaction. So sometimes I use medical cannabis like co-analgesic in oncological pain treatment, and I use it with opioids or also with other co-analgesics like pregabalin, for example. In some situations when patients cannot use opioids, usually when they don't tolerate opioids, I also try to use really high doses of cannabis, like 3-4 grams per day in palliative care medicine. But in this situation, I must mix it with pregabalin, with venlafaxine, with metamizole, with other drugs. Definitely, medical cannabis is weaker than opioids. Next point. Chronic and neuropathic pain, especially neuropathic pain. Officially, it's medical cannabis. It's last way of treatment. Maybe not last. Usually, the last way is invasive treatment like thermolysis. The kind of treatment when we try to destroy the nerve structure, it's the last. But in pharmacology or phytopharmacology, cannabis treatment it's the last one, even after opioids. In my personal, but it's my personal opinion, it should be before opioids. Generally, everybody knows that opioids are completely useless in neuropathic pain, except tapentadol, but tapentadol works also like SNRI, so it's the reason it also could help in neuropathic pain. Generally, opioids are completely useless. So in my personal opinion, CBD, THC should be before opioids. It is. Next, migraine treatment. Officially, we start waiting for double-blinded test, but one of them is just finished but not publicated. So I'm waiting. Fibromyalgia and other functional pain. I usually use cannabis in fibromyalgia. From time to time, when I have a patient with really hard, irritable bowel syndrome, I also try to use medical cannabis, but it's hardly ever. But I have really a lot of patients with fibromyalgia. So, of course, the gold standard in fibromyalgia are duloxetine and pregabalin, but really a lot of patients cannot take both of them, or in a lot of situations that this drug just don't work. And there are really a lot of undiscovered patients with fibromyalgia. The diagnosis of fibromyalgia are quite poor. I think not only in Poland, also in other Western and Eastern countries. And so I have a lot of patients that really well tolerate medical cannabis and use it every day in fibromyalgia. Endometriosis, very interesting to use cannabinoids in endometriosis. Of course, it's not the first step treatment. The first step, we have hormonal therapy, laparoscopy therapy, but it's definitely better idea to use cannabis than opioids. You could try it. Autism. Okay, I have only one patient with autism but you know, I work in pain clinic, so I generally don't treat autism. Epilepsy, also I don't treat epilepsy. Some of my patients have pain disease like migraine or fibromyalgia and also epilepsy. And in this group of patients, I also see that they don't have epileptic problem after cannabinoids, but it's not the reason that I used. Okay, so what's about CBD? And we have a big problem with CBD. Why? Because we can find CBD in medical cannabis-based medicine like sativas. We can find CBD in medical marijuana strains, but also we can find CBD in supplements. And usually people in Poland, probably in other countries also, buy supplements. It's a really big problem because CBD have really a lot of drug interaction. I will not talk about this because I think it will be boring for you. It's rather for doctors, but you should know that it's a real problem, especially when somebody take warfarin, or Xarelto. It's a brand name, but maybe you know it, and mixed it with CBD, it could increase bleeding. So even you can die when you mix CBD with other drugs. Clear CBD are quite safe, but when you mix it with other drugs, potentially you can even die.
Just one second, doctor, if I may jump in, because we've kind of run over a little bit of time right now, because I do think there's a strict timeline for this webinar.
Okay.
Sorry, if I'm correct or not.
Okay. I usually talk for doctors, so okay.
Well, it's fascinating, but being the moderator, I'm just trying to ensure that everything moves across.
Okay, no problem.
Go ahead.
Safety of cannabis use. It's also important. Cannabis alone is extremely safe, and it's almost impossible to die for overdose of cannabis. If you want to suicide, you should take around 100 grams of cannabis in one time. And usually
this is a panel for lawyers, so let me just say that wasn't by no way any recommendation on how to achieve the intended result. This is more of a hypothetical of if one would hypothetically, what would the reasonable man take, or what person take?
Usually we use 100 milligrams, 150 milligrams. Lethal dose, it's around 100 grams. In some other strains, 200 grams. So it's completely impossible to die after it. But of course, you could have side effects. Okay, so what kind of cannabis we have?
I think, doctor, I think we're gonna have to go through this very, very quickly with the types right now, what's available, maybe because I know you have a few more slides to go. So if we might be able to wrap this up just a little bit quickly, because we're a little bit over time. I appreciate it. Thank you.
The first strain, lemon skunk, typical dominant, very interesting. Also, very popular for recreational non-medical use. It was the first strain. From time to time, there is problem with buying it in pharmacy because they cannot prepare 19% THCs for Poland. It's less than 16. It's around 16%, so they sell it for Germany. It's a big problem, really. It's my photo, so I have all for them. Second one, typical indica from Aurora, Snow Dome, LA Confidential, very interesting indica. Usually I mix this indica for the evening with lemon skunk for a day. Some of my patients that work intellectually, like in IT or financial analytics, they really can take cannabis sativa lemon skunk during the day of the work, and they can work. Really, it's possible. After this indica strain, it's typical relaxant strain. Also it's painkiller, but rather you cannot work after it. Ghost strain haze, also sativa dominant, but very special strain. High dose of THC, you could be sleepy after it. I don't like to use this strain. Sometimes I use it in very heavy cancer pain. Sometimes I use it in palliative care, but it has a lot of side effects. And you should not start treatment, especially for this palliative care. The new strain, Equiposa Hybrid 828, it just came to the market. Very interesting, and I think that generally we should start treatment for this strain. We can use it all day and in the night. In some situation, I prefer clear THC strains, for example, fibromyalgia or headache. But generally, this one is the best. But I'm just starting a work with it. I don't have any feedback from my patients because it's a new strain. It came last week to our market. Aurora 1 to 12. It's very interesting because it was the first strain, high CBD. Very good, very interesting, very high quality, but the company cannot sell all of it because it was too expensive for Polish people, for Polish patients. But a very good strain. Unfortunately, it's out of the market. Sorry, I'm a little bit tired. Originally, this strain Canatonic should have more THC, 3 to 5 THC, maybe a little bit less CBD, 10, 12. And in my personal opinion, this strain could be definitely better in original with 3-5 THC. Generally, we need strain with low THC, but not less than 1. Low THC and high CBD. We don't have it. And now we don't have this strain in the market. Next,
Dr. Jesna, can we? So the strain discussion, we absolutely love the discussion of the different types of strains that are available. But yeah, we have to move it along just a little bit so we can have a discussion of the legal underpinnings as well.
But I understand the presentation may be made available. So if any other strains are left additional slides, they'll have access to, and obviously your contact details as well.
Minutes, okay. Sorry, give me 5 minutes. Penelope hybrid, very interesting. We don't have it on the market now. We had it, but now it's out of the market. And new product, cannabis extractum normatum, it's extremely expensive, and I suppose that nobody will use it. Now, what we should know, the most important thing, that biodiversity. Per os, it's 2-3 times worse than in vaporization. So all extractum product for per os use, oral use, will work 2-3 times weaker. So in all this product, we should use higher doses. What about pharmacoeconomic? We have Sativex that it's extremely expensive and almost nobody uses it, because we can compare. In here, 1 milligram cost 2.5 PLN, and when we use raw cannabis, 1 milligram cost 0.38 PLN. So if you can compare it, it's nothing to talk about it. It's just nonsense to use Sativex, especially when we need 1-to-1 ratio. Next, what's about this cannabis extractum? In this situation, it's even worse, because when we compare this cannabis extractum 10% THC to Aurora 20% THC, we can see that this Aurora product, it's 0.29 PLN for 1 milligrams, and cannabis extractum, it's 1.99. But you should remember that cannabis extractum work 2-3 times weaker. So in fact, cannabis extractum, this one that we have already, it's almost 20 times more expensive. It's nonsense to use it, especially when you really want to treat something. Of course, you can use a small doses next to the placebo effect, but it's not logical to use drug in placebo doses. It's not logical to use drug in in so small doses. Of course, it's a good idea to start dosing cannabis in titration, and it's good idea to start from all those and go to the big. And now in this high THC strength, it's very difficult to use so small doses without psychoactive effect. It's also a problem, but it's completely nonsense to use 20 milligrams of THC per os per day. And the last one, we have to remember that we should use cannabis by certificate vaporizer. In fact, nobody uses it. In fact, I think that 90% of my patients use Phoenix Mini. It's the cheapest Chinese vaporizer on the market now. Yeah, but both of them are medical devices, and they are definitely they are more expensive. Something about bibliography. Yep, I finished. Sorry.
Doctor, thank you very much. That is fascinating. We don't normally get that level of detail and the background on kind of the actual products. I hope that everyone found that somewhat enlightening. Maybe some people have learned some things. Maybe it's a bit they've already known it. I know there's some things I definitely picked up on there. But now to go on to the more boring lawyer aspect of it all, I think I'll hand over to Malvina to discuss some maybe technical aspects that I think some of the lawyers would like to hear about. So Malvina, on to you, please. Thank you once again, Dr. Albert Jesnak. Dziękuję.
Thank you, George. Well, because as we are running out of time a little bit, I have to reschedule a little bit the sequence of my presentation and the speech. I wanted to tell a little bit about the historical background, because to understand well the current legal situation, it is good to know the historical background, how the Polish regulations on drugs evaluated during the years. But
Malvina, we will go a little bit over, so we're not going to cut you off too early. So please feel free to share the information that you feel you need to.
Absolutely, thank you. So coming back, the current legal regulation on drugs, which is also the basis of the legalization of cannabis for medical use, was adopted in 1985. And it tightened much the attitude of Polish law against narcotic drugs. First of all, CDA, because in short words, the Act on Counteracting Drug Addiction is called CDA in Poland, among the lawyers, excluded the hemp herb and hemp resin from the medical purposes use by including the substances on the list of narcotic drugs. This caused a lot of problems for the patient who were searching for the therapy with medical cannabis, because they had to get the product either by the direct import or by filling the prescription outside Poland, or just searching for the product on the black market. Hopefully, the situation changed in 2017 when the provisions of CDA were amended and the cannabis was legalized for medical use. To be honest, these voices of the opponents of the legalization, which were heard during the process of legalization, are still very well heard. And to be honest, the big part of the conservative parliamentary majority nowadays still presents the negative attitude towards cannabis, indicating that even the liberalization of regulations on medical cannabis may be just a doorway to a non-medical use, and also not the whole, but the bigger part of the conservative parliamentary majority in Polish parliament is against the legalization of the recreational use, and also against the decriminalization of the possession of the small amounts for the personal use. Okay, maybe now a few words about the main barriers which Polish cannabis market faces. First, the one big important group of barriers is of the regulatory nature. As to the medical cannabis, in short terms, in the legal understanding, this is the cannabis with the THC content exceeding 0.2% on a dry weight basis. And this medical cannabis, in terms of CDA, it's called non-fibrous cannabis, may be introduced into the market only and on condition of obtaining the marketing authorization, which is granted according to the provisions of pharmaceutical law. And the second important fact is that manufacturing of the non-fibrous cannabis is subject to the good manufacturing practice standards in Poland. These two factors cause that, as a consequence, the procedure of registration of medical cannabis in Poland is a long and quite comprehensive process. As a result, although the legalization took place 4 years ago, we have still only 6 products of 3 producers, as to my knowledge, on the market. And this causes that the demand of Polish patients is year by year not fully satisfied. As to the main barriers from the patient's perspective, so first, it's just the same as for the business. these are the regulatory obstacles and regulatory procedures. But it's worth emphasizing that the knowledge of Polish patients and doctors is increasing year by year. And the newest data show, these are the data from 2021, then in Poland there are over 9 million of patients having legally access to the medical cannabis. These are the data only for 3 quarters of 2021 without fourth quarter. So it shows that the number of patients searching for the product is really quite big. Upon these barriers, the next important obstacle for the development of Polish market of cannabis is the ban of the cultivation of medical cannabis. So the whole amount of products which is now available on Polish market, it is the cannabis from import, because it is not permitted to cultivate medical cannabis, high THC cannabis in Poland. Last but not least, the very important obstacle for the patients, which the patient face, is the quite high price of the product and the lack of reimbursement of this medicine. To be honest, there is also not a real prospect that the reimbursement will be introduced in the nearest future. Now, maybe a little piece of information about these legal definitions and the legal division between medical cannabis and industrial hemp. So, according to the provisions of CDA regulation, CDA divides the cannabis into the 2 categories. Legal categories. The first one is non-fibrous hemp, which is commonly called also the medical cannabis. And these are the plants of the species cannabis with a total content of THC exceeding 0.2% on a dry weight basis. And the second category, it's fibrous hemp, also called industrial hemp or just simply hemp. And these are the plants of the species cannabis in general, with the total content not exceeding or up to 0.2% of THC. According to the provisions of CDA, the non-fibrous hemp, so the medical cannabis, is not categorized as a pharmaceutical product but a pharmaceutical raw material. And this approach complicates a little bit the legal situation of cannabis. According to the legal definition, the manufacturing of the pharmaceutical raw material in the form of medical cannabis means the repackaging it from collective packages into the packages in which the product is delivered to the pharmacies. Please remember that this very narrow definition is important because in Poland, as a consequence of the ban for the cultivation, the only product, the only medical cannabis is the one imported. So now maybe a few words about the procedure of getting to the Polish market from the regulatory perspective. So the entity who intends to start manufacturing and importing medical cannabis, I mean manufacturing in this narrow meaning of repackaging imported raw material to the packages for distribution for pharmacies, has to obtain for 2 kinds of licenses. The first, it is the license for manufacturing and import of pharmaceutical product, which is granted upon the provisions of pharmaceutical law by the chief pharmaceutical inspector. And the second license, which is the license for dealing with narcotic drugs, which is granted not upon the pharmaceutical law, but upon the CDA provisions by the chief pharmaceutical inspector. Moreover, each shipment of medical cannabis entering Polish market has to obtain a separate consent for import issued by the chief pharmaceutical inspector. The importer who obtained those the license for manufacturing and import is registered in the register of importers and manufacturers of medicinal products. And due to this fact, it is obliged to perform all the duties imposed on the manufacturers and importers of pharmaceuticals, including possession proper premises, equipment, procedures, all standards determined by the good manufacturing practice. The second stage after obtaining the import and manufacturing license is obtaining the marketing authorization for medical cannabis. This is the permit which is granted by the President of the Office for Registration of Medicinal Products and Medical Devices for the period of 5 years, in the procedure quite similar to the procedure of applying for marketing authorization for pharmaceuticals. Applying for the marketing authorization, as in case of the procedures of registration of pharmaceuticals, the applicant has to attach a copy of the manufacturing and import license. This is why the first stage was obtaining this kind of licenses. So, in fact, the entity that intends to start operations of importing medical cannabis in Poland may choose among two solutions. First is to obtain the required licenses for manufacturing and import by himself, or second, to establish a cooperation with the entity which meets the requirements for import and manufacturing of pharmaceutical products. So in most cases, this second solution is chosen by the entities who think or who prepare to enter Polish market. As to the rules of distribution of medical cannabis in Poland, they are quite the same as the rules of distribution of medical products. For wholesale distribution is run by the pharmaceutical wholesalers, and retail distribution is to the patients is run by the pharmacies. In case of pharmaceutical distribution, wholesale distribution, the pharmaceutical wholesaler has to obtain apart the standard wholesale distribution license he has for dealing with pharmaceuticals, the separate license, which is a drug trading license. The pharmacists don't have to meet any additional requirements in terms of obtaining additional permits. However, of course, they have to meet the standards established for dealing with narcotic substances and narcotic drugs. What is absolutely worth a little bit of description, these are the legal changes of the regulations which are expected by the market even in 2022. We are hardly convinced that the legal regulations will change during this year. Because at the January 2022, there was the reading of 3 drafts of the acts regulating some aspects of some legal aspects of the cannabis. First 2 were rejected, unfortunately, and the 4th one is passed to the further proceedings and now is in under the works of commission in Parliament. The first rejected draft provided for the general admission of cultivation of cannabis with high THC concentration for the purposes of the medical use, which is right now prohibited. And the second important aspect which was provided for in this draft was the reimbursement of cannabis-based medicines for certain indications. As I said, this draft was unfortunately rejected because I am telling unfortunately because it touched the main problems faced by the patients and the market and the business nowadays. The second rejected draft, I'm telling about the rejected drafts because they in a very good way show what are the actual needs and expectations of Polish cannabis market. So the second rejected draft was the comprehensive regulation of the cultivation of industrial hemp with a low THC level in Poland. And this draft also assumed the raising of the permitted THC level in industrial hemp in Poland from 0.2 to 0.3. And finally, the third draft, which was under the reading in Parliament, and it's now discussed in the Commission and under further works, is the draft which provides 2 important amendments of CDA regulation. The first one is the increase of the permissible concentration of THC in the industrial hemp from 0.2 to 0.3. And the second one is the admission of cannabis cultivation with the concentration of THC exceeding 0.3. So this cultivation, according to the draft, will be entrusted to the research institutes, which are the state organizational units. So if the first change concerning the increase of the permissible concentration of THC is absolutely the change expected by the both cannabis community and cannabis business, and also but the second amendment absolutely doesn't meet the expectations and the needs of the cannabis business, because it was expected that the general admission of cultivation of cannabis with high THC was expected. Polish farmers are, I think, quite well prepared to be able to cultivate not only the cannabis with the low content of THC, but at the same time, they could cultivate the high THC concentrated cannabis. Unfortunately, it seems that this piece of business will be entrusted to the state institutions, these research institutes. George and
yes, I think
Christopher, I tried to.
you did a very I'm trying to find my camera back on. Sorry, I'm having a bit of connection issues with my internet, so please just wave your hand or continue if I sound a bit choppy. But thank you very much. You managed to get through that with 1 minute to spare. That was that was impressive. But in case anything was kind of missed here right now, obviously we can open the floor for any kind of Q&A to anybody, either directed at Dr. Albert or Malvina. And obviously it goes without saying, our contact details will be available to you. So please reach out to either of us if you have any questions, if any of your clients are looking to enter not even just Poland, but also the CEE region, because we obviously have you know, a best friend firms I work with and cooperate on a for quite some time, including Robert Jappy in London. You know, we have Kai in Germany, so we have a good network of people who we work with. So any other questions, again, please don't hesitate. But I guess I'll turn it over maybe to Chris if you want to be ask if there's any questions to direct to Malvina or Albert. Please, everybody ask.
Absolutely. And thank you so much, Malvina, for running through that presentation at breakneck speed. There was so much information in there. My head is spinning just a little bit. And then, of course, Dr. Albert Jesna, I hope I'm not butchering that too badly. Thank you for your presentation as well. Some really interesting stuff in there, including the efficacy of the concentrates, the extracts versus flower. Some really interesting information that I found what I'm going to be reading about for the later part of today. Malvina, you did a great job of giving us an overview of what the current cultivation status looks like in Poland, relatively non-existent, especially for the medical markets. Can you tell us, when you're looking at imports, are there certain jurisdictions that you're seeing a bulk of the imports coming from, or countries that you work with sort of often in order to provide some of the medical products for patients? Do you have an indication of sort of where maybe some of the products are coming from?
Well, to answer this question, it has to be emphasized that Polish requirements of regulatory requirements state the condition that the pharmaceutical raw material must meet the GMP standards. As we all know, many jurisdictions do not have implemented GMP, or even the manufacturers don't do it by themselves, because it's also possible to adopt to the standards. But as we also all know, these standards are not very easy to be met. However, the solution which is worth considering is finding the plant in one of European countries which has adopted the GMP and performed the manufacturing activities. So in such a case, the product delivered from, supplied from this plant will be GMP manufactured. This is, I think, the very important remark how to deal with this problem of Polish GMP.
Yeah, we've had interest from obviously there are many Canadian players, but you know, it's normally via their EU subsidiaries will actually have EU GMP certificated. So going down that route. So we've seen obviously some from Germany, some from Denmark, some in Israel, interest on registering product, but it must be thrown out to everybody there. The registration process in Poland is not the simplest of ones. And in fact, I think Dr. Albert can even jump in here too. I think it's still only Aurora and Canopy or Spectrum who actually have registered product. And there's some that have been going on for numerous years. So I mean, there's a lot of administrative hurdles, a lot of back and forth from the authorities here. So it's not a somebody just wants to register and kind of, you know, the next day or next week, they'll have their product registered. It's a bit more of a cumbersome process here. So with that comes the legal work involved and the expertise to navigate all those landmines.
Of course, the registration is a long and hard process in Poland, but now we have 3 companies that have their product. One, Sativex, just drug, and 2 with rough material, Aurora and Spectrum. But we also have a small Polish company that is specialized in veterinary medicine, and now they are now going into the market with this extract. Now it's possible to order it in pharmacy by pharmacists to have it. So probably it came in this or next week, but. What I said, it will be extremely expensive. What is interesting, also it's possible to make extract from raw, dry cannabis flower. In all countries, there are 3 or 4 pharmacies that can do this, but they are doing it. They have a special staff, special machine, special equipment. I know that there are 3 pharmacists in Wrocław and one in Śląsk who prepare this cannabis extract from dried raw material that we already have, and it's only 2 times more expensive than raw cannabis. Yeah, and one second thing that I missed. When we're talking about a number of patients in Poland, now we have a big problem, big ethic problem, that a lot of cannabis clinics not really treat the disease. In fact, we have some doctors who prescribe medical cannabis for recreational users. Sure. Of course, we know this problem in all the world. For example, in United States with opioids, yes, or in UK with Xanax. Benzodiazepines. So it's nothing new in the world, but when we are talking about patients, we must think about it. The real number of patients is definitely smaller. I cannot say how many patients we really have now.
Okay. In terms of the product registrations, you took us through a couple of the different strains. Is each one of those strains required to have a separate registration? And is part of the registration process, does part of that process require that there is a specific therapeutic outcome related to a specific strain? Or so you went through those different strains. And yeah, so each one of those has to be registered individually as a strain.
Yes.
Is that correct? Okay.
Yes. And I'm not a lawyer, but I know that all of them must be registered separately because, in fact, there are other products. We should look it like opioids. No, opioids and cannabis. There is no drug like cannabis, and there is no drug like opioids. Yes, and there are some difference between opioids. For example, there are big difference between fentanyl and tapentadol. The same in cannabis. There are some big difference between canatonic and lemon skunk, and some small difference, like between lemon skunk and ghost train haze, sure, for example.
Sure, and it's interesting because I think that most other jurisdictions don't delineate on the strain level, right? And so when there's a medical recommendation, it has to do with the particular ailment that you're treating, and then some feeling around therapeutic effects, but not that there is a one-to-one connection between a specific strain and a specific therapeutic outcome. So I think that's something that I'm seeing that's a little bit different in Poland, maybe a little bit closer to a traditional pharmaceutical market than a lot of what we call the medical markets in the United States, which are much closer to over-the-counter, sort of like if you're buying aspirin, right? And so aspirin or Tylenol or Motrin, whatever it is, they all have sort of similar effects. And we can sort of all buy them over the counter versus a true pharmaceutical, which it sounds like Poland is sort of closer to a true pharmaceutical.
Yeah, but this policy situation is quite logical. This one, in this point, because all strains are, in fact, different.
Of course,
different drug. No, they are a raw material, but they are different.
Yeah, sure. Okay, I think we've gone a little bit over. I really appreciate all the information, the market dynamics. Oh, one more question. I'm sorry. So any medical use in Poland must be prescribed by a doctor, and the prescription is fulfilled by a pharmacist, correct? Is that how the medicine reaches?
Sorry, could you repeat, because I don't understand you correctly. All medical cannabis strain must be prescribed by a doctor. All of them.
And is it in the United States we have dispensaries that you can walk into? Is it in there? Is it in Poland? Is it through a pharmacist, a traditional pharmacist?
Yes.
Okay. Perfect.
Yes, and of course, not all of pharmacists have the medical cannabis.
Of course.
In Warsaw now we have maybe 10 to 20 pharmacists that have it. But in fact, I cooperate with 3, 4 of them.
Okay.
And I must know which strain I can prescribe, because I don't want to see the situation when I prescribed a strain that it's impossible to buy it. Sometimes I do it, but in this situation, I told to the patient that you have to wait 1-2 weeks for this strain, and then we will start the therapy. Yeah.
Of course.
And also the process of prescription building is extremely difficult. We in Poland now use a prescription, and we have around 50 different applications for medical professional. And in all of them, there is a different way to prescribe medical cannabis. So
from my understanding, doctor, is that there are many more prescriptions, let's say, than there were, let's say, 3 years ago, 4 years ago. There was a time when, at the very beginning, the way the law was written was it gave doctors a lot of free range, for lack of a better expression, a lot of discretion for which ailments they can prescribe medical cannabis for. But that was first on the market. While it seemed excellent because doctors could freely prescribe I think there are only a few listed ones, like multiple sclerosis and maybe epilepsy, but then said, or any other something the doctor may deem there be therapeutic purposes for. But that was actually somewhat initially resisted because the free range, because of the lack of specifics. If there were any other ailments that it could in other countries be used to treat, the doctors here were a bit reluctant, for lack of a better term, to risk losing their medical license for signing a prescription for somebody if it wouldn't be done. So at least Albert may have different thoughts than me on this, but I remember when this was first coming out about 4 or 3 years ago, where there was a bit of the people and the doctors at that stage weren't as educated as they are now. So from my understanding, doctors are a bit more free with writing prescriptions these days. Doctor, would you agree with that?
The year ago, I had a prelection on Polish Family Doctors Conference, because they invite me to talk about medical cannabis, and I think that everybody was extremely interesting about it. So I think it's changing all the time. It's normal that people are afraid of the new, especially the doctors who are quite conservative. group of people, but really it's changing.
One more thought to what Mr. Jeznach said. Doctors in Poland are used to dealing with, used to prescribing pharmaceutical products, which has their indications. Every medicine has its indications determined at the moment of granting the marketing authorization. And in case of medical cannabis, there are no indications. So at the one side, it gives doctors a lot of freedom,
exactly.
But from the other side, they have to decide on their own according to their knowledge and experience. And it is something which, in my opinion, they are not used to.
Yeah. And we see the same thing in the United States, you know, on a state-by-state basis, where certain states have enumerated ailments that can be treated with cannabis, certain states don't. And so in certain states, we have that wide freedom. And in certain states, it's much more prescriptive about what you can prescribe for what. And so it's a big experiment here. we'll let you know.
The biggest advantages and disadvantages of medical marijuana. Yeah, it's great that you told it. And still after this 3 years, we have some technical problem. For example, last week we have a problem with P1 a prescription system, and a lot of doctors and a lot of pharmacists in all country had a problem with medical cannabis prescription. Also So I use the same prescription from last 3 years, and some of my friends told me that pharmacists cannot see what is on prescription. I see it, my patient see it, but pharmacist not. So even after 3 years, we still have some technical problem with our prescription system.
Always. Thank you all so much for joining us today.